Sunset today is at 4:29 in the afternoon. Now, it's now. I refuse on principle to call this evening, by the way. I mean, this happens every year, right? Shadows lengthen, sun sits lower in the sky. The darkness seeps into the mornings and crowds out the afternoons. I mean, really, it's not like this is a surprise to any of us, but still, it's getting dark out there. Now, we don't actually know the exact day that Jesus was born. I mean, in the first century, unless you were an emperor, no one really kept track of that sort of thing. Nobody cared what day the son of a carpenter was born in some random manger in Bethlehem. I mean, except for a couple of astrologers from the East. And in the early church, the date that they set for Christmas actually floated around a little bit, the way that Easter does. And the fact that it got pinned down to the new Julian calendar on different years in different places is how we in the West ended up celebrating Christ's birth on December 25th, while the Eastern Church celebrates it on January 6th. That's what gives you those infamous 12 days of Christmas, if you've ever been curious. But regardless of the exact day, there's something fitting about choosing this time of year, when things are getting darker and colder, when the trees are dying and the winds are biting. There's something fitting about the fact that we chose the darkest days of the year to celebrate light entering the world. Our reading today comes from Isaiah 9, verses 1 to 7. There will be no gloom for those who were in anguish. In the former time, he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the later time, he will make glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee, the Gentiles. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them a light has shined. You have multiplied exaltation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For all the boots of the trampling warriors and all the garments rolled in blood shall be burned as fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born. To us a son is given. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Great will be his authority, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. He will establish and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Now, Isaiah lived in a dark time. And this was just a generation or so before the exile. The people had sunken into their sins. Foreign idols had been brought into the land and were worshipped by God's people. The powerful had grown wealthy and had seemed to prosper. but they did it by oppressing the poor and neglecting the needy. And then they would come with blood-stained hands to make their offerings in God's temple, thinking to themselves, well, if we want to sin this much, we just have to make this many sacrifices, right? I mean, enough turtle doves and maybe God will forget all about the poor, the orphan, and the widow. And things had gotten so bad that God was about to shatter that temple and send his people to a little timeout in Babylon. And Isaiah, like the other true prophets, called out the wickedness that he saw time and again in his ministry. He did it until they sawed him in half because they got so tired of hearing. So yeah, it was a dark time. But it was into that darkness that Isaiah spoke a message of hope. The clearest picture in the entire Old Testament of the salvation that God had planned. The night is dark, but dawn is coming. In spite of the shadows that surrounded him, Isaiah knew that ultimately the light would break through. The Messiah was coming. The Christ child would break the yoke that weighed down the oppressed. The Prince of Peace who would turn sword and spear into plow and pruning hook, who would burn every garment rolled in blood, and who would rule with justice and righteousness, not just for one single human lifetime, but forever. Today is the second Sunday of Advent, the season of anticipation. This is the season when we remember all of those in ages past who sat in the darkness and hoped for the light. This is a season when we sit in the lengthening shadows and remember the source of our own hope. Look, sunset started at 4:29. I think it's just about gone now. And that sun sets over a world consumed by multiple wars, by chronic injustice, a world that divides people along every axis that they can imagine or manage, that constantly turns people made in God's image against other people who are also made in God's image. It's getting dark out there. But like Isaiah, we know that that isn't the full picture. That's just half the story. Because God is working, God is acting, and Christ is coming back. We may sit in darkness, but we have seen the great light, and the dawn will come again. It may not happen in our lifetime. I mean, Isaiah knew that it was coming, and it certainly didn't happen in his. The early church knew that Christ would return, but it didn't happen in their lifetime either. And as Adam mentioned last week, the early Anabaptists had some rather apocalyptic expectations. Didn't happen in their lifetime either. And yet we know that it is coming, just as they knew that it was coming. And we wait just as they waited, in faith. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things unseen, at least according to Hebrews 11. The assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things unseen. That is how we wait. With assurance and conviction, we say that the darkness of this world is a passing thing. That all those wars will end. The injustice that's all around us will cease. The divisions which plague our world will be swallowed up by the one blinding truth that we are all created in God's image. And as sure as the sun will rise, we wait for that day. Now, this is normally the part of the sermon where I'm supposed to talk about applications, right? I'm supposed to take this all down from the level of the theoretical and tell people about how this affects their life today. What's the call to action? What are we being asked to do here? But this passage isn't really about what we're supposed to do. And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of other passages that talk all about that. But this passage is about what God is going to do. And all that we're being asked to do is believe it. To know it in our bones. To put God's future at the center of our thoughts and to know God's character. What that character means for this world. There isn't a particular call to action because this is something that should be under and behind every action, every word, every hope that we have. The night is long and dark and cold. The world is violent and selfish and hateful. But dawn is drawing near, and the sun will come again. Praise God.